Hey guys, and welcome back to Battlefront Updates. I think it's finally time to talk about the communication properly and take in all the facts that we have gotten today actually that explains to some degree why we haven't gotten the communication we wanted. It's going to be a lot of topics to cover in this video, and I want to try to both go through all the issues, what I think the solution is, and why some things have transpired like they have. But a lot of this is going to be my opinion and my thoughts, so keep that in mind and don't see this as facts unless I state that it is. But the first thing I wanted to bring up was basically that today Sledgehammer70, the community manager for Battlefront 2, tweeted a little bit, giving us more explanation onto how the communication works and why it can be so frustrating for the players. As I've said before, he did leave his notice to leave EA last week, and some of these tweets to some degree also explains why. So but what he said in one of the tweets that a lot of people caught up on, which I think is very interesting, is the fact that as EA is a publicly traded company, they can only reveal specific details on what is coming within that quarter. So what that means is that they cannot talk about the updates that are coming outside the specific quarter that you are in right now. And that means that right now we are in the first quarter. It's actually the fourth quarter of 2017 if we're talking about fiscal quarters, but that's a topic for another video. In short, think that a quarter is January to March, April to June, July to September, and then October to December. I don't want to go into too much detail, but it basically has to do with something called revenue recognition. So I guess in summary, if they were to reveal something that comes out in a future quarter, then all sales from now until then will not actually be accounted for until in that quarter. So to the investors, it will look like you made zero money from this point up until the quarter where that update is actually coming. I know it's incredibly stupid, but I tried to read up on this, but it's why a lot of big game companies can't reveal a lot of stuff far into the future when it comes to already released products. And that's also why smaller game companies that still have big games can talk about roadmaps and such a lot easier, because if they aren't a publicly traded company, they don't have the same kind of rules. And my instant thought was, well, why could they reveal the roadmap for the first Battlefront game a lot earlier, and why can they talk about games that are coming outside of the current quarter? And another developer did actually respond, and what I take from this is simply that a product that is already out, you should not affect the sales within the current quarter by talking about stuff in future quarters. And that is why you can't talk about free updates for Battlefront 2, for instance, whereas you can talk about a paid DLC product like for the last game or the next Battlefield game that is also coming out outside of this current quarter. And this is something that the community managers, the developers, have to oblige, because otherwise I think EA could get into a lot of trouble. And this is a really bad rule for EA and for us as gamers, because you can just imagine how much issues this causes, especially for games that are now trying to be live service games. We didn't notice as much of an issue with Battlefront 1 because, like I said, they could reveal the future DLCs. But for this game, they can't reveal the future free content that is outside the quarter. And this rule is basically stopping DICE and EA from actually treating this game like a live service game like they promised us. And Sledgehammer70 actually said in another tweet that we can only communicate what information is given/approved. And I'll be honest, this sort of thing was a factor in why I am leaving. So you can understand how frustrating it must be to work as a community manager. Your job is to communicate, but you can't communicate, and then the community gets annoyed on you because they think you should communicate, but you're not allowed to do it. So it must be so frustrating not being able to communicate when people expect you in person to communicate. And that's what kind of one of the first things I wanted to bring up here, that this has nothing to do with individual people, developers, community managers, producers. This has to do with corporate level rules that just ruins the opportunity to communicate properly. And Dennis has at multiple occasions responded and said that he wants better communication. First of all, he did say that he wanted to have a developer Q&A on a regular basis, so he showed that he was open to that. And he also responded to my tweet about the criticism against the communication, saying that it was a valid criticism, and also that he wanted more official communication, which was something someone else suggested. So it is again very clear that they want to do it, but corporate rules and other things are stopping them from properly communicating. One thing I wanted to bring up, for instance, is the difference between Battlefield and Battlefront. Battlefield still has the same quarterly rule. That has to do with EA as a company of whole. But since Disney and Lucasfilm isn't involved in Battlefield and DICE and EA owns that IP, they can be so much more free with what they talk with. I mean, if you combine the quarterly rule with the fact that Lucasfilm and Disney seems to have to approve every single little piece of information, that causes extremely poor communication, and that's why we are in the situation that we currently are. For instance, one really frustrating example that I can bring up is the DC-15LE bug, or the server issues in general. You never see the EA Star Wars account tweeting about an unfortunate bug or servers being down. I mean, they even promoted the DC-15LE bug until the community lashed out and they deleted those tweets. But the only way we can get these type of responses is by digging into the developers' Twitters, which that really shouldn't have to be the case. For instance, the first response we got about the DC-15LE, I think, was actually CJ, one of the designers on the game, who responded to my tweets explaining that what the issue was and so on. And then Dennis also confirmed out on Reddit that they are looking into fixing that. But EA Star Wars still hasn't said anything about it. What about a simple tweet saying, "Hey, we know there's some issues with the cooling attachments currently in the game. We're working on a fix. Stay tuned." That's all it's required. But it seems like they're not allowed to use the EA Star Wars account for that. It only has to be promotional posts, it has to be gameplay highlights and so on. So that means that we have to rely on individual developers' Twitter feeds, which really shouldn't be the case. So there is a lot of different things causing these communication issues for the game. And I feel like the main things are, of course, this really stupid quarterly rule that forces them to not talk about future content, but also the fact that Disney and Lucasfilm has such a tight grip of this IP that they need to get every single piece of information approved, which means that you can't have this small communication, the kind of instant responses that the Battlefield account has when there's an issue and such, but everything needs to be approved by Lucasfilm and Disney. So those things combined just cause a lot of issues for us, simply put. And when I tweeted about this, one of my viewers, William, responded saying that they do the same thing for Star Wars The Old Republic. They release quarterly roadmaps and that's it for 3 months, with events, sales sprinkled throughout. So there are still ways to get around these rules. So even though this quarterly rule is really annoying for us as gamers, there are ways that they can do this better. And I wanted to give you a couple of examples of what I think they could do to make this better within the current rules that they have. I mean, ideally they would get rid of that quarterly rule, but let's say they can't do that. Well, do like Star Wars The Old Republic. Have a quarterly roadmap where you at the beginning of the quarter tell us what is happening for the rest of the quarter. So in the beginning of April they could tell us that this patch is coming in April, this is coming in May, and this is coming in June. So we have an idea of what we can expect, because I think people are patient. People can be patient if they know what is coming. Just look at the old game. Sure, there was some frustration when people were tweeting, "Oh, where's the trailer coming out? Come on, where's the next patch?" But overall, people were a lot more patient because they knew that we get this DLC in this month, whereas now we really don't know anything. As of this point, recording this video, the only official thing we know is that we're getting more information on the progression update in March. And that's about it. We've had hints, obviously, about future content from Dennis, but nothing official and no timelines either. And if we're talking about the more smaller and kind of instant response communication, I think that's something that Disney and Lucasfilm needs to loosen their grip on. Let the developers respond instantly through official channels like EA Star Wars or something like that, so people know what's going on. I mean, I'm pretty sure a big part of the community still don't know what's up with this cooling attachment issues. They might just think it was an intentional nerf or buff depending on which weapon you're looking at. I mean, not everyone watches my videos, looks at Reddit or follows the developers, so why not have an official channel for that? If it can't be EA Star Wars, well, create another type of account that we can follow and get these kind of official updates from. And then another thing that would obviously be fantastic would be a regular developer Q&A. Whether it's once a week, twice a week, or just once a month, that would do so much for the game. Especially if we know it's coming, so we know, oh, Dennis is gonna have his little Q&A session next Friday, well, then we know that we have something to look forward to and where we can potentially get our answers. This doesn't have to be a high production thing that will take a lot of resources, but it can be something like a lot of other game companies do. sit down in the office, 10 minutes, talk straight into the camera, respond to some of the community's concerns, and then put it out on the social media. Again, I get the feeling that why this doesn't work is because there's such a massive approval process that by the time that Q&A is going to be approved, it might be irrelevant, which is kind of what happened to the Q&A on the forum until Dennis just decided to go all in and answer things that I think he might not have had approved, especially since he had to change some of his answers for the conquest mode and such. I know I've been jumping a little bit in between topics here, but I think I've covered most of the issues with the current communication and the current disconnect that it feels between the community and the official communication from EA, Star Wars and such. They basically committed to making a live service game, but they don't have the tools in terms of communication for a live service game, and that obviously upsets a large part of the community because it's so frustrating not knowing what is coming and being promised to get a live service treatment. I'm sure that they have content lined up for the rest of the year that actually feels like a live service, but without the communication and without us knowing anything about it, that doesn't really help, because a lot of people will stop playing the game when they feel no hope for the future. But yeah, I think I got all my thoughts across in this video. Again, these are my thoughts. I'm not educated on how laws for publicly traded companies in the US works, or all the politics within EA, DICE, and Disney and Lucasfilm, but this is just my opinion from an outside perspective with all the information we currently have and why the current communication is such an issue for the game. Hopefully this is something that can be improved for the future, and like I said, it's very obvious that Dennis and the other developers wants to communicate, so whatever it is that's stopping them other than the quarterly rule needs to be changed, fixed or removed so that they can communicate as much as they want and that we can get as much communication as we want. But that brings this video to an end. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, may the Force be with you.